Nothing sinks a TV series like bad reviews, and these shows got a whole lot of them. Here's the thing though, are the critics always right? He may have an impressive resume, but Tom Holland recommends The Crowded Room above all his other work. Holland is incredibly proud of his performance on the series as Danny Sullivan, a character loosely based on the man who became known as the campus rapist for the crimes he committed in the 1970s. The Apple TV Plus series follows Danny's life in prison as he reflects on his past and how it shaped the man he became.
Do you really think that I killed her? That I killed both of them?
While critics acknowledged Holland's impressive work in The Crowded Room, they were far less impressed by the show as a whole. Rotten Tomatoes' critical consensus states that the story runs in circles, resulting in an exhausting and often frustrating experience, landing it a 33% rating. Audiences really went to bat for the show, however, with over 1,000 reviews contributing to a 92% popcorn meter score. That's a nearly 60-point divide between critics and viewers. Many of those reviews expressed shock and confusion over the low critic score, with words like amazing and masterpiece frequently appearing in fans' write-ups. In between appearing in literally every movie to have come out in the last 10 years, it seems Chris Pratt also had time to star in Amazon Prime's 2022 action thriller series The Terminal List. Pratt plays US Navy SEAL James Reese, a man trying to piece together the events that unfolded during a disastrous covert mission. While critics praised Pratt's performance and the show's high production values, they were otherwise down on The Terminal List, with some claiming it might have worked better as a single 2-hour movie. Others, less charitably, called it a boring, cliché-ridden mess.
Excuse me, what?
But audiences completely disagreed, and the show now holds a Rotten Tomatoes popcorn meter score of 94% against a critic score of 40%. Fans love The Terminal List for its exciting action set pieces and the fact that each episode feels like its own Hollywood blockbuster. Many viewers specifically call out how the critics were way off base in their own reviews, and it seems the viewing figures match the audience feedback, as The Terminal List has since been renewed for a second season. It was only a matter of time before Chuck Lorre brought his magic touch to the world of streaming, and he did exactly that in 2017 with the Netflix series Disjointed, which also saw Kathy Bates front a TV comedy for the first time since Harry's Law ended its run in 2012. In Disjointed, Bates plays Ruth Whitefeather Feldman, who runs an LA marijuana dispensary with her son, Travis. On the surface, it feels like a workplace comedy with a stoner bent, and much of the time it's exactly that. But Disjointed doesn't shy away from tackling serious subject matter like bigotry, mental health, and chronic illness. Sadly, critics almost universally hated the show. The little praise it could muster was directed at Bates and her co-stars, particularly Betsy Sidaro, whose performance was cited as a highlight. But Disjointed also found an audience of devoted fans who not only praised the show at the time, but have since launched multiple petitions for its revival. They've had no luck so far though. Having been cancelled after its second season, Disjointed now stands as the only Chuck Lorre series of the 2010s that didn't last 3 seasons or more. So many comic book shows have been made in the last 10 years or so that it's nearly impossible to have watched them all.
Come on, what did you expect?
In fact, you might be forgiven for not knowing some of them existed in the first place. Such is the case for Helstrom, a 2020 Hulu series based on the 2 Marvel characters with that surname. The show came and went with little fanfare, lost in the shuffle of countless other comic book properties on the big and small screen at the time, along with the major distraction of that whole COVID-19 thing. It's perhaps no surprise that neither Hulu nor Marvel were especially interested in promoting a show about the vigilante children of a serial killer during such a dark time. Still, it wasn't a total bomb. In one glowing review, Sadie Guinness of TV Guide praised the show's compelling mythology and morally complicated characters, adding, "I cannot recommend Helstrom more." But her review was an exception among the overwhelming majority of other critics, who had kind words for the show's special effects and basically nothing else. Still, the audience that did come across Helstrom seemed to really dig it, with Rotten Tomatoes audience reviews proclaiming it a hidden gem. Several even claim that it's the best Marvel show to date. The death of Norm Macdonald in 2021 saw the passing of a true comedic genius, albeit one who always seemed to have to wait to get the recognition he deserved. Macdonald's shows, his movies, and his stint on Saturday Night Live all seemed to get middling reception at the time before benefiting from reprisal later on. After that cycle repeated itself over and over again, he would hope that critics might eventually realize that maybe they need to take a closer look at Macdonald's work, rather than dismissing it out of hand.
You know what hurts the most is the lack of respect.
Alas, when Macdonald landed a talk show on Netflix in 2018 called Norm Macdonald Has a Show, critics once again lined up to take it down. Tim Goodman of The Hollywood Reporter called the show pretty terrible, while Caroline Framke of Variety lamented, "Even if the question of how Macdonald got this show is easily answered, the question of why anyone outside he and his diehard fans should bother with it never is." But those diehard fans seem to have no trouble loving the show, with audience scores on all platforms equating to near universal acclaim. Don't be surprised to see think pieces turn up in 10 years' time, decrying those initial reviews and insisting the show deserved more love in its time, when Macdonald was still alive to appreciate it. Friends from College follows a group of old college friends who attempt to maintain their social circles through the tribulations of adult life.
Just do the drugs!
Do the drugs!
Do the drugs!
If this feels like the perfect breezy premise for a group of talented actors to have fun with, you'll find that the show's audience tended to agree. The critics, however, did not, and the show currently holds a 26% score on Rotten Tomatoes. And sure, the stakes aren't particularly high. The story never goes anywhere surprising either, and few characters make choices you can't see coming from a mile away. These days, though, there's a sense that an original series on streaming needs to be high-concept, high-budget prestige television, and so critics can be much too harsh on shows that don't fit those criteria. You can't help but wonder if Friends from College might have fared far better with critics had it aired as a network sitcom. In 2015, Amazon Prime Video made its first major push into the world of streaming when the service debuted 7 original series in one go. But 2 of those shows never got a second season, and 2 more were cancelled after season 2, including the psychological thriller series Hand of God. The show follows a corrupt judge who suffers a breakdown after experiencing a personal tragedy, at which point he starts to believe that God is instructing him to become a vigilante. He soon joins a religious cult that helps him along this newfound path of violence. The first season of Hand of God holds an unimpressive 44 rating on Metacritic, with critics damning the show for being too dark, too unpleasant, too bleak, and too satisfied with itself for its edgy violence. But the user score paints a very different picture, with a 7.2 or generally favorable rating, which matches the 85% popcorn meter score on Rotten Tomatoes. Viewers connected much better to the show's themes and characters than critics seem to, and many believed all that grittiness served the story rather than distracted from it. Alas, fans never got to see a 3rd season of Hand of God, and the series is mostly remembered today as one of Prime Video's first failures. Police procedurals are a dime a dozen, as this genre of television never seems to fall out of favor.
One more thing.
You'd be hard-pressed to find any era of television over the last 50 years or so where there wasn't at least one police procedural on the air, if not 2 or 3 or more. And some have even become so big that they spawned multiple spin-off shows. With all that in mind then, you might be forgiven for missing Rosewood, which ran for 2 seasons on Fox between 2015 and 2017. Or maybe you didn't miss it, but you did see the abysmal reviews it received, a mere 9% on Rotten Tomatoes, and decided Rosewood just wasn't worth making room for. But that would have been a mistake, as the show has more than enough going for it to set it apart from the pack. Morris Chestnut plays Dr. Rosewood, a pathology expert who runs a private autopsy lab that frequently finds things the Miami PD missed. He's also a surprisingly upbeat and optimistic guy, which is not what you'd typically find in the medical, investigative genius archetype. And that's exactly what the show's fans enjoyed about it, a lighter, breezier approach to not only the procedural genre, but also television dramas in general. In 2012, Netflix pushed into original programming when it brought the Norwegian comedy series Lilyhammer to the US exclusively through its streaming service. This turned out to be a test run for Netflix originals, as 2013 saw the first batch of such programming, including the horror series Hemlock Grove. Executive produced by Eli Roth, Hemlock Grove revolves around a rich and powerful family that lives in a town filled with dark secrets. The show was a success for Netflix. It initially beat the viewing figures of fellow 2013 debut House of Cards and ran for a grand total of 3 seasons. Critics were not remotely impressed, however, and many slammed Hemlock Grove in their reviews. Then in 2022, Netflix let one of its first original series go when it removed Hemlock Grove from the service. It hasn't yet found a home elsewhere, but is currently available for purchase through multiple PVOD services. Network television sitcoms were in a pretty dire place in the 2010s, meaning new shows had to try something radically different to get any sort of attention whatsoever. For The Neighbors, which debuted on ABC in 2012, that meant giving the series a sci-fi bent. The story follows a human family that moves into a gated community only to find that their neighbors are actually aliens disguised as humans.
Morning. Morning.
Critics weren't sold on The Neighbors when it first began, with the initial batch of Season 1 reviews scoring a mere 31% on Rotten Tomatoes. The show's premise was frequently compared to that of Third Rock from the Sun, with many critics pointing out that The Neighbors was far inferior to that series. Audiences, on the other hand, took to The Neighbors right away. Many appreciated its high-concept premise and meta-humor, and the series even scored ratings high enough to land a second season. For what it's worth, critics did largely come around on The Neighbors, and many wrote more positively about it during the second season, but the audience had been on board from day one. Sadly though, too few of those viewers followed the show when it was moved to Fridays in Season 2. Ratings plummeted as a result, and ABC consigned The Neighbors to the ash heap soon after. Season 1 of Ghost Whisperer debuted to a paltry 17% on Rotten Tomatoes, with the website's critical consensus stating, "Melodramatic and schmaltzy, Ghost Whisperer traffics in contrived uplift and makes a hash of the rules governing its supernatural universe." The show stars Jennifer Love Hewitt as Melinda Gordon, a medium who tries to live a normal life while helping the spirits of the dead deal with unfinished business. Ghost Whisperer ran for 5 seasons on CBS from 2005 to 2010, clearly connecting with audiences in spite of whatever the critics had to say about it. Audiences, however, praised this as a feel-good show that could often be genuinely moving, one that offered a nice alternative to the increasingly gritty and morally complex television of the era. And the fact that cable channels Ion, Sci-Fi, and WeTV were all willing to pay $700,000 per episode for the syndication rerun rights only further proves how much people enjoy watching Ghost Whisperer over and over. George Lopez ran for 6 seasons on ABC in the 2000s. Critics praised the show for its mostly Latin cast, but lamented that this positive representation was wasted on a by-the-numbers sitcom that does nothing unique or special with the format. 6 seasons is no short lifespan for a series though, and it says all there is to say about how viewers felt about George and his family. People don't always need a sitcom to reinvent the wheel, and many viewers will be happy so long as the laughs and the love are there. But this certainly applies to George Lopez. If you need further proof just how far the show reached, it made history in 2007 when it joined Nick at Night. George Lopez stayed there for a remarkable 13 years after that, much longer than shows tend to last on the network. Okay, so let's be fair here. Knight Rider is pure 80s cheese, and critics weren't entirely wrong to call it that. David Hasselhoff stars as Detective Michael Knight, who has a self-aware, computer-controlled talking car named Kit, with enough gadgets to put the Batmobile to shame.
Holy cliche.
It's a goofy concept that gave way to equally goofy storylines, and at the time, critics were not remotely impressed. But the fact that Knight Rider not only lasted for 4 seasons but went on to spawn multiple TV movies, several spin-offs, and a reboot proves that it found a sizable and passionate fanbase. And that's to say nothing of all the Knight Rider video games, novels, and pop culture references that have cropped up over the decades since the original show debuted. Honestly, this is an incredibly fun show with a great theme song that was a treat to watch in its day. Today it acts as a kind of time capsule containing everything that was considered cool in the mid-80s. No, critics haven't reappraised it, and they probably never will, but the enduring legacy of Knight Rider more than speaks for itself. Anyone who watched TV in the late 80s to late 90s will at least be aware of Alien Nation. For a long time, the franchise seemed practically inescapable, with a constant rotation of commercials either for the original 1988 film, the 1989 TV series, or one of the 5 made-for-TV movies that aired between 1994 and 1997. Clearly, audiences are invested in the earthbound adventures of the Tenctonese aliens. A number of reboot attempts have even been discussed over the years, though none have yet to come to fruition. If critics had their way, however, the Alien Nation franchise would have never gone beyond its first movie. That film has 53% on Rotten Tomatoes, and the TV series fared even worse at a measly 43%. In a retrospective review, William Thomas of Empire gave the show 1 star out of 5, writing that, "Alien Nation succeeds in taking everything that didn't work about the movie and straining it through the dodgy production values of late 80s TV." Critics at the time didn't think much better of it. Howard Rosenberg of the Los Angeles Times claimed that the show lacked subtlety, while also arguing that its alien characters weren't different enough from the humans to be interesting. It's the type of premise that seems specifically designed to connect with audiences and rile the critics. An alien portrayed by a puppet crashes in suburbia and comes to live with a mild-mannered family who must keep him a secret while learning to love the little fella. And no, Alf didn't exactly delight critics upon the show's release in 1986, but audiences immediately fell in love with the adorable alien and his misadventures with the Tanner family.
Hey, I don't make fun of your stupid planet, Electoral College.
Running for just 4 seasons on NBC between 1986 and 1990, Alf had a surprisingly short life, considering how often it was rerun in the years that followed. And as it happens, the show wasn't cancelled due to low ratings or any perceived lack of popularity, but rather as a result of tension behind the scenes. Audiences loved Alf at the time, in fact enough so that it spawned 2 separate animated spin-off shows as well as a 1996 made-for-TV movie. And lest anyone think that the character is any less beloved today, none other than Ryan Reynolds made a deal in 2023 to host a marathon of the series on his own streaming service, Maximum Effort. A whole generation of kids grew up watching Saved by the Bell. This classic late 80s sitcom aired for 4 seasons and was rerun over and over for many years after that. Then in 1993, the show decided to reinvent itself as a primetime sitcom with Saved by the Bell: The College Years, and it's probably fair to say that most critics hated it. Today, the series holds a dismal 9% critic score on Rotten Tomatoes. But the kids who had watched Saved by the Bell in 1989 were teens by 1993, and they were more than ready for a sitcom about Zack and the gang in college. As such, The College Years is fondly remembered by that generation. Unfortunately, teens alone don't have the numbers to make a primetime show a hit, and The College Years only lasted a single season. Critics and audiences alike agreed that the 2004 reboot of Battlestar Galactica was a seriously great show. But what about the 1978 run? The original Battlestar Galactica follows a group of humans who must escape the deadly Cylons as they flee the destruction of their homeworlds. There's no denying that Battlestar Galactica has become a bona fide cult classic in more recent years. It's also proved to be hugely influential in the sci-fi genre, with some even calling it the first example of a space western on television, a subgenre that would later find great popularity with Cowboy Bebop, Firefly, and the Borderlands video games. But the critics see things a little differently. Battlestar Galactica has a mere 35% on Rotten Tomatoes, and the consensus largely consists of retrospective reviews of the show that were written up to coincide with the reboot. Going further back, The Hollywood Reporter republished its original review in 2014. It read, in part, "Battlestar Galactica is a poor man's version of Star Wars, poor in every detail, including writing, pacing, characterization, and above all, imagination." Critics have never been particularly kind to sitcoms, especially if they don't have any real hook. The legacy of Full House speaks for itself, a show that is beloved by the generation that grew up with it and now gets watched to death via reruns by fans of all ages. Does this show do anything overwhelmingly unique? Not really. The only thing even remotely approaching a gimmick is that the Tanner household also includes some extended family members and family friends who just so happen to live in the house as well. But there was something about the chemistry of the cast that just made the show so comforting for real families. How did critics feel about it though? Well, the Los Angeles Times review called it a great argument for birth control. Retroactive reviews are much better. Josh Krupp of Uprocks wrote in 2016 that the show is like a bowl of white rice, or spaghetti with no butter or sauce. And the 2016 reboot Fuller House was a similar story. Trashed by critics yet so beloved by audiences that Netflix gave it a full 5 seasons. For every Simpsons or South Park, there are about 2 other dozen primetime animated shows that never found their audience. And while most of them failed because they just weren't particularly good, some were at least passable, if not great. They just didn't get the ratings they deserved. The Oblongs became both a ratings disappointment and a critical bomb when it first ran on the WB in 2001. In fact, the show's viewing figures were so dire that the WB didn't even bother airing all of the show's already completed 13 episodes. Instead, Adult Swim picked it up to finish the season. To be fair, the premise was pretty dark. The show follows Bob Oblong and his family, who all have various physical disfigurements as a result of exposure to pollution and radiation from the wealthy community that lives up the hill from them. So yeah, this was probably a little much for primetime network television, but the audience that did find the Oblongs clearly loved it, and the show is now widely considered to be something of an overlooked gem.